The storm rolled in fast, lightning clawing at the sky above Ethan Gray's cabin. Rain lashed the windows, and thunder boomed in the distance, but Ethan hardly noticed. His days were a routine of isolation, tending to the fire, scribbling half-hearted notes in a dusty journal, and nursing a bottle of whiskey as the hours dragged by. Tonight, though, felt different. The air was heavier, charged with a tension that prickled the back of his neck. He set down his glass and peered out the window. Through the dense forest, a strange light pulsed faintly, illuminating the trees in rhythmic waves. It wasn't lightning. This glow was alive, breathing, calling. Ethan hesitated. Curiosity warred with his usual inclination to leave the world alone. But the light pulsed again, brighter this time, and something deep within him stirred. Grabbing his coat and flashlight, he stepped into the storm. The rain soaked him instantly, but he pushed forward, following the light deeper into the woods. The glow grew stronger, until he reached a small clearing where the air seemed to hum with energy. In the center, a figure lay crumpled on the ground, surrounded by scorched earth and shards of what looked like crystal. Ethan froze. The figure, a woman, but not like any woman he'd ever seen, was barely moving. Her skin shimmered faintly, hues of silver and violet shifting across her body, and her hair, long and weightless, seemed to defy gravity, glowing softly in the dark. She looked fragile, otherworldly, and unmistakably alien. He approached cautiously, shining the flashlight over her. Her eyes fluttered open, locking onto his with an intensity that made him stop in his tracks. Her voice, though weak, carried a melodic quality that resonated in his chest. "Help, please," she whispered. Ethan didn't understand how he could comprehend her words, but there was no time to question it. He crouched beside her, noticing the faint cracks running along her crystalline skin, as though she were breaking apart. She winced as he gently lifted her into his arms, her body unnaturally light yet warm. "I've got you," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He carried her back to the cabin, his mind racing. Who was she? What was she? And what the hell had she been running from? He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting someone, or something, to emerge from the shadows, but the forest was silent aside from the rain. Inside, Ethan laid her on the couch, carefully wrapping her in a blanket. Her breathing was shallow, her luminous eyes half-lidded as she watched him. He felt an unspoken urgency, as if time were slipping through his fingers. "I need to stabilize," she said, her voice trembling. "Connection between us. It's the only way." Ethan frowned. "Connection? What are you talking about?" She reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed against his. A jolt of warmth shot through him, spreading from his fingertips to his core. Her skin wasn't just warm. It was alive with a gentle pulse, syncing with his heartbeat. "Our energies," she whispered. "They must align. Your frequency. It can heal me." Ethan stared at her, torn between disbelief and the undeniable sensation coursing through him. He had no idea what she meant, but her desperate eyes left no room for argument. Slowly, he took her hand, holding it firmly between his own. A soft glow enveloped them, spreading from their joined hands. Ethan felt a strange pull, like gravity shifting inside him, drawing him closer to her. The air between them seemed to hum, and for a moment, the storm outside faded into nothing. Aurora, her name came unbidden to his mind, as if she'd whispered it directly into his thoughts. Closed her eyes, her breathing steadying as the glow intensified. Ethan's own pulse quickened, his heart pounding in sync with hers. The sensation was overwhelming, intimate in a way he couldn't quite grasp. He felt exposed, yet inexplicably connected to her, as if their very souls were intertwining. But the moment was shattered by a sudden noise outside. Ethan's head snapped toward the door, his grip on Aurora tightening. "They've found me," she said, her voice laced with fear. "We're not safe." Ethan didn't need to ask who they were. The urgency in her voice was enough. He grabbed a rifle from the wall, his hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Whatever was coming, he wasn't about to let it take her. Stay here, he said, but Aurora shook her head. We face them together, she insisted, rising shakily to her feet. Her glow dimmed slightly, but her resolve was clear. Ethan nodded, and together they braced for whatever was coming. The door burst open, and two figures stepped into the cabin, their forms obscured by dark, metallic armor. Their eyes glowed red, scanning the room with cold precision. Ethan raised his rifle, but Aurora placed a hand on his arm. Wait, she said softly. The intruder spoke in a guttural language, but Aurora responded in kind, her tone defiant. Ethan couldn't understand the exchange, but the tension in the room was palpable. One of the figures raised a weapon, its barrel crackling with energy. Enough, Aurora said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. She stepped forward, her glow intensifying. The intruders hesitated, their stance faltering under her radiant presence. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot, the bullet narrowly missing the nearest figure. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and the intruders retreated slightly, their glowing eyes flickering. We need to move, Aurora said urgently. They won't stop. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing with the next steps. He didn't know where this journey would take them, but one thing was certain. He wasn't letting her face it alone. As they slipped into the night, the storm still raging around them, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose stirring within him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was fighting for something. And as Aurora's hand tightened around his, he realized he wasn't fighting alone. The rain had subsided by the time Ethan and Aurora found refuge in a rocky outcrop deep within the forest. The narrow cave offered minimal protection, but it was hidden well enough to buy them time. Ethan helped Aurora settle onto a flat stone, her glow dim but steady. She leaned heavily against the wall, her crystalline skin still faintly cracked. You're pushing yourself too hard, Ethan said, his voice low but firm. He crouched beside her, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of improvement. I have to, Aurora replied softly. Without the synchronization, my body will continue to deteriorate. Ethan exhaled sharply, his mind racing. Everything she had told him earlier still rattled around in his head. Harmonic frequencies, energy bonds, none of it made sense by conventional science, but the undeniable truth was that her very survival hinged on their connection. And judging by the glowing cracks along her body, time was running out. We should try again, she said, her luminous eyes meeting his. The bond between us is strong. I can feel it. Ethan hesitated. The last attempt had been overwhelming, pulling him into a state of vulnerability he hadn't experienced in years. The way their energies intertwined, it was intimate, far beyond anything physical he had known. Yet seeing her like this, fragile and on the brink, left him no room for doubt. All right, he said finally, his voice steady. What do I need to do? Aurora offered a small, grateful smile. She shifted, reaching out her hand. Just take my hand again. Let the connection guide us. Ethan grasped her hand, feeling the familiar warmth spread through him. This time he didn't resist the pull. The air around them seemed to hum, a soft vibration that resonated in his chest. Aurora's glow intensified, casting gentle waves of light across the cave walls. Close your eyes, she murmured. Ethan obeyed, focusing on the rhythm of their joined energy. His breathing slowed, syncing with hers. The hum grew louder, and a sensation of weightlessness enveloped him. He could feel her presence not just beside him but within him, a swirling current of emotion and sensation. Images flickered in his mind, memories that weren't his, a vast crystalline landscape bathed in twilight, towering spires that pulsed with light, connected by delicate, shimmering threads. He felt Aurora's longing, her grief for a world slowly crumbling under the weight of its own failing life force. Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. This is your home? Yes, Aurora whispered, her voice a gentle echo in his mind. Our world's energy flows through everything, but it's breaking apart. That's why I came to find you. Ethan's heart clenched. He could feel her desperation, her hope resting entirely on him. The weight of it was staggering, But there was something else too. A growing warmth, a connection that went beyond words. His thumb brushed against the back of her hand, and Aurora leaned into the touch, her glow pulsing softly in response. Suddenly, the connection deepened. Ethan felt a surge of energy between them, more powerful than before. Aurora gasped, her free hand instinctively pressing against his chest. The touch sent a ripple through him, igniting every nerve with a pleasant heat. Their breathing quickened, their faces inches apart. Ethan opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. Her expression was soft, vulnerable, yet there was a spark of determination in her eyes. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned forward. Ethan didn't pull away. Their lips met, the kiss gentle at first, then deepening as the energy between them swelled. The glow surrounding them brightened, filling the cave with a soft, radiant light. Aurora's touch grew more confident, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Ethan's hand moved to her waist, holding her steady as their connection intensified. The warmth between them was unlike anything he had ever felt, pure, consuming, and deeply intimate. But just as the energy reached its peak, a sharp noise echoed from outside the cave. Both of them froze, the glow dimming as the moment shattered. Ethan rose to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung over his shoulder. Aurora's eyes darted to the cave entrance, her glow flickering nervously. "They've found us again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "Stay behind me." The tension in the air was palpable as the sound of footsteps grew closer. Shadows flickered against the cave walls, and soon the unmistakable forms of the bounty hunters loomed at the entrance. Their metallic armor gleamed dully in the faint light, and their red, glowing eyes locked onto Ethan and Aurora. One of the hunters raised a weapon, its barrel crackling with energy. "Surrender the girl," a distorted voice commanded. Ethan raised his rifle, his aim steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Not a chance." The hunter hesitated, clearly calculating the risk. Aurora stepped forward, her glow intensifying once more. "We won't go with you," she said firmly, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to resonate through the cave. The second hunter moved to flank them, but Ethan was ready. He fired a warning shot, the bullet striking the cave wall near the intruder's head. The hunter stumbled back, momentarily thrown off balance. "Ethan," Aurora said quickly, her hand on his arm, "we can't fight them here. We need to leave." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. He grabbed a small pouch of supplies from the corner of the cave, slinging it over his shoulder. "Stay close." Aurora pressed against his back as they moved toward a narrow passage at the rear of the cave. The bounty hunters shouted in their guttural language, the sound of their heavy footsteps echoing behind them. Ethan led Aurora through the twisting passage, his flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The passage opened into another part of the forest, the towering trees providing some cover. Ethan and Aurora moved quickly, their breaths coming in short gasps. The sound of pursuit faded slightly, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters caught up. They reached a small stream, and Ethan knelt down, motioning for Aurora to do the same. "We'll follow the water," he said. "It'll mask our tracks." Aurora nodded, her glow dim but steady. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on me." Ethan gave her a small, reassuring smile. "We're in this together." As they continued down the stream, the forest around them grew darker, the air thick with tension. The danger was far from over, but for the first time, Ethan felt a spark of hope. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they would face it together. The forest was eerily quiet as Ethan and Aurora followed the stream, their footsteps splashing softly in the shallow water. The canopy overhead was dense, casting long shadows that danced with every subtle movement of the wind. Ethan's senses were on high alert, every rustle and distant call of wildlife sharpening his focus. Aurora's faint glow was their only light, and even that was dimmed to avoid detection. "We're clear for now," Ethan said, glancing over his shoulder. The bounty hunters were nowhere in sight, but he knew they wouldn't stop hunting. His grip tightened on his rifle, the cold metal a comforting weight. Aurora's breathing was steady but shallow, her exhaustion evident. "They'll keep tracking us," she murmured. "Their technology, it can sense energy signatures. We need to be further away before we stop." Ethan nodded. "We'll put more distance between us. You just let me know if you need to rest." They continued in silence, the only sound the soft gurgle of the stream and their measured footsteps. Ethan's mind churned, replaying everything that had happened in the last few hours. His once quiet, uneventful life had been upended, and now he was running for his life with an alien whose very existence defied everything he knew. And yet, she felt so familiar. The connection between them lingered even now. Every glance, every touch, seemed to resonate with an unspoken understanding. Ethan wasn't sure if it was the result of their synchronization or something deeper. Either way, the bond was undeniable, and it grew stronger with each passing moment. After another hour of trekking, Aurora finally stopped, her hand lightly touching Ethan's arm. "Here," she said softly. "We can rest for a moment." Ethan scanned the area, finding a small, sheltered alcove beneath a fallen tree. It wasn't much, but it would do. He helped Aurora settle down on a patch of moss, her body leaning against his as she exhaled a tired breath. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, though her glow flickered slightly. "Just need to recover some energy. The synchronization earlier helped, but it's not enough." Ethan sat beside her, their shoulders brushing. The closeness felt natural, comforting even. He glanced at her, taking in the delicate contours of her face, the way her eyes reflected the faint light like twin stars. Despite everything, she carried herself with a quiet strength that Ethan couldn't help but admire. "You said earlier that our energies need to align more," he said, his tone thoughtful. "How do we do that? How do we make it last longer?" Aurora turned to him, her expression soft but serious. "It's not just about physical proximity, it's about trust, vulnerability. We have to be completely open with each other. No barriers, no reservations." Ethan chuckled dryly. "Not exactly my strong suit." She placed a hand on his, the touch sending a gentle warmth through his skin. "You've already shown more courage and trust than you realize, Ethan. You've opened yourself to me in ways most wouldn't. That's why our connection is growing stronger." Ethan looked down at their joined hands, his thumb absent-mindedly brushing against hers. The warmth spread, a soothing balm against the tension that had been building in his chest. "What happens if we fully synchronize?" Aurora hesitated, her gaze dropping for a moment before meeting his again. "It's a merging of our essences. You'll feel everything I feel, and I'll feel everything you do. It's intense, but it can heal me, stabilize my energy." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't sure he was ready for that level of intimacy, but the alternative was unthinkable. "Let's try again," he said, his voice steady. "I want to help you." Aurora smiled, a small but genuine expression that lit up her features. "Thank you." She shifted closer, their knees touching as she took both of his hands in hers. The forest around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the rhythmic sound of their breathing and the faint hum of their connection. Aurora's glow intensified slightly, a soft, pulsing light that matched the steady beat of Ethan's heart. "Close your eyes," she whispered. Ethan obeyed, focusing on the warmth spreading from her hands to his entire body. The hum grew louder, a gentle vibration that resonated deep within him. He could feel her presence more vividly now, her emotions intertwining with his. There was fear, yes, but also hope, a fragile yet unyielding thread that bound them together. Aurora leaned in, her forehead resting lightly against his. The intimacy of the gesture sent a shiver down Ethan's spine, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he let himself be drawn further into the connection, their shared energy weaving a delicate but powerful bond. "Stay with me," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I'm here," Ethan replied, his voice equally soft. Their synchronization deepened, the pulsing light around them growing brighter. Ethan felt a rush of sensations, Aurora's warmth, her heartbeat, the faint tingling of her skin against his. It was overwhelming yet soothing, a paradox of intensity and calm. Without thinking, Ethan lifted a hand to her face, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. Aurora's eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a gaze so full of trust and vulnerability that it took his breath away. Slowly, he leaned in, their lips brushing in a kiss that was both tender and electric. The energy between them surged, their bond reaching a new level of connection. Ethan could feel Aurora's strength returning, the cracks in her crystalline skin beginning to heal. Her glow brightened, enveloping them in a cocoon of light that seemed to pulse in time with their synchronized heartbeats. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their foreheads still touching. Aurora smiled softly, her hand resting against Ethan's chest. "You're stronger than you think," she said. Ethan chuckled, his voice tinged with relief and awe. "Guess I'm full of surprises." Their moment of peace was short-lived. The faint sound of movement in the distance snapped Ethan back to reality. He pulled away, his eyes scanning the dark forest. "They're still out there," he said grimly. Aurora nodded, her glow dimming slightly as she stood. "We need to keep moving." Ethan rose, his rifle at the ready. Despite the danger looming around them, he felt more determined than ever. Their bond was growing, and with it, so was his resolve. Together, they could face whatever came next. As they disappeared deeper into the forest, the faint glow of Aurora's light leading the way, Ethan knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that they might just survive it. The forest began to thin as Ethan and Aurora pressed on, their pace steady but cautious. The dim light of dawn filtered through the canopy, casting long shadows across the mossy ground. Aurora's glow had softened to a gentle shimmer, her energy stabilizing after their last synchronization. Ethan glanced at her as they walked, noticing the color returning to her crystalline skin. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "We're getting closer," Aurora said, her voice calm but resolute. "Closer to what?" Ethan asked, scanning the terrain ahead. His grip on the rifle was firm, his senses attuned to any sign of danger. "There's a convergence point nearby," Aurora explained. "It's a natural source of energy that can amplify our bond. If we reach it, it could give us the boost we need to fully stabilize me." Ethan nodded, the weight of their mission pressing on his shoulders. "And what about them?" He gestured vaguely toward the forest behind them, where the threat of the bounty hunters still loomed. "They'll follow," Aurora said, her expression grim. "But the convergence point will give us an advantage. Its energy is volatile, unpredictable. They won't risk getting too close." It wasn't much of a reassurance, but it was something. Ethan pushed down his doubts and focused on the task at hand. They had come too far to turn back now. As they moved, the air began to change, growing warmer and more charged. Ethan could feel a subtle hum beneath his feet, a vibration that seemed to pulse in sync with his heartbeat. Aurora's glow brightened slightly, her steps more confident. "We're almost there," she said, her eyes fixed ahead. The forest opened up to reveal a small clearing. In the center stood a massive crystalline structure, its jagged spires reaching toward the sky. The crystals pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, casting an otherworldly glow across the clearing. The air was thick with energy, the hum now a steady thrumming that resonated in Ethan's chest. Aurora approached the structure, her hand outstretched. "This is it," she said softly. "The convergence point." Ethan followed, his eyes scanning the clearing for any signs of movement. The place felt both awe-inspiring and dangerous, as if it were teetering on the edge of some great cosmic force. He could see why the bounty hunters would be wary of it. Aurora turned to him, her expression serious. "We need to synchronize here, fully this time. The convergence point will amplify our connection and stabilize my energy." Ethan nodded, setting his rifle down within arm's reach. "What do I need to do?" Aurora stepped closer, her luminous eyes locking onto his. "Trust me, let yourself be open to the connection. Completely. No barriers, no fear." Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached for her hands, their fingers intertwining as the warmth of her touch spread through him. The hum of the convergence point grew louder, the light from the crystals intensifying. Aurora's glow brightened as she leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "Close your eyes," she whispered. Ethan did as she asked, focusing on the rhythm of their breathing. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the steady pulse of their shared energy. He could feel Aurora's presence more vividly than ever, her emotions intertwining with his own. There was a sense of peace, of belonging, that he hadn't felt in years. The connection deepened, their energies merging in a seamless flow. Ethan felt a surge of warmth, a powerful wave of emotion that left him breathless. Aurora's hands tightened around his, her body leaning into his as the synchronization reached its peak. A sudden burst of light enveloped them, the energy from the convergence point surging through their bond. Ethan felt a rush of sensations. Aurora's strength, her determination, her unwavering trust in him. It was overwhelming yet exhilarating, a moment of pure unity. As the light began to fade, Ethan opened his eyes, his breath coming in short gasps. Aurora was still holding his hands, her glow steady and strong. The cracks in her crystalline skin had vanished, her energy fully stabilized. "You did it," Ethan said, his voice filled with awe. "We did it," Aurora corrected, a small smile playing on her lips. Their moment of triumph was short-lived. A sudden noise from the edge of the clearing snapped them back to reality. Ethan grabbed his rifle, his eyes scanning the tree line. "They're here," Aurora said, her voice tense. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The bounty hunters had been relentless in their pursuit, and now they were closing in on the convergence point. He could hear the faint hum of their energy weapons, the sound sending a chill down his spine. "We need to hold them off," Ethan said, his grip tightening on the rifle. "If they disrupt the convergence point, it could destabilize everything." Aurora nodded, her glow intensifying as she prepared to defend their position. The first bounty hunter emerged from the trees, their metallic armor glinting in the light of the crystals. Ethan fired a warning shot, the bullet narrowly missing its target. The hunter raised their weapon, a crackling bolt of energy shooting toward them. Aurora reacted quickly, raising her hand to deflect the blast with a shimmering barrier of light. The energy dissipated harmlessly, but the effort left her visibly strained. "They're trying to force us out," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. Ethan fired another shot, this time hitting the second hunter who had appeared on their flank. The figure staggered but quickly recovered, their armor absorbing most of the impact. The two hunters advanced cautiously, their movements calculated and deliberate. "We can't let them get any closer," Aurora said. "The convergence point is too volatile." Ethan nodded, his mind racing for a solution. He glanced at the crystalline structure, its pulsing light growing more erratic as the confrontation continued. An idea began to form, risky but their only chance. "I'll draw their fire," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You focus on stabilizing the convergence point." Aurora's eyes widened in protest. "Ethan, you can't." "I've got this," he said, cutting her off. "Trust me." Without waiting for a response, Ethan moved out of cover, firing several shots in rapid succession. The bounty hunters immediately shifted their focus to him, their weapons blazing. Ethan ducked and weaved, using the terrain to his advantage as he led them away from the center of the clearing. Aurora turned her attention to the convergence point, her hands glowing as she channeled her energy into the structure. The crystals responded, their light growing steadier as the volatile hum began to stabilize. Ethan's heart pounded as he continued to evade the hunters, his movements fueled by adrenaline. He could feel the heat of their energy blasts as they narrowly missed him, but he didn't falter. He had to buy Aurora enough time. Finally, with a brilliant surge of light, the convergence point stabilized fully, its energy harmonizing with Aurora's. The shockwave that followed sent the bounty hunters reeling, their weapons shorting out as the force of the blast pushed them back. Ethan took the opportunity to regroup with Aurora, his breath ragged but his determination unshaken. Together, they stood before the crystalline structure, their bond stronger than ever. For now, they had won. But the battle was far from over. The shock wave from the convergence point stabilization rippled through the clearing, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The bounty hunters, their armor sparking and weapons temporarily disabled, staggered backward, retreating into the cover of the forest. For now, they had been driven off, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and attacked again. Ethan lowered his rifle, exhaling a shaky breath. His body ached from the exertion, but adrenaline kept him standing. Beside him, Aurora's glow pulsed steadily, her energy stabilized thanks to the convergence point. She turned to him, her luminous eyes filled with both relief and concern. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. "Nothing I can't handle," Ethan replied, though the strain in his voice betrayed his exhaustion. "You?" Aurora shook her head, her hand lightly brushing against his arm. The warmth of her touch sent a comforting wave through him. "The convergence point worked. My energy is stable, but it won't last forever. We need to move before they come back." Ethan nodded, glancing around the clearing. The crystalline structure continued to pulse with light, its hum now a soothing rhythm. It was a temporary sanctuary, but they couldn't stay here indefinitely. He grabbed his pack, slinging it over his shoulder. "We'll head east," he said, his voice resolute. "There's a canyon not far from here. It'll give us better cover." Aurora hesitated for a moment, her gaze lingering on the convergence point. "This place, it feels alive, like it's watching over us." Ethan followed her gaze, the weight of her words settling in his mind. The convergence point was more than just a source of energy. It was a reminder of the connection between their worlds, a fragile yet powerful link that had brought them together. He placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the moment. "Let's go," he said gently. "We can't let them catch us off guard again." They moved quickly, the forest around them growing denser as they made their way toward the canyon. The air was thick with tension, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves setting Ethan on edge. Aurora stayed close, her presence a steadying force as they navigated the rugged terrain. As they descended into the canyon, the temperature dropped, the rocky walls providing a natural barrier against their pursuers. Ethan found a narrow path along the canyon floor, leading them to a small alcove sheltered by overhanging rock. It was a perfect spot to rest and regroup. Ethan set down his pack and leaned against the cool stone, his muscles protesting after the relentless pace they had kept. Aurora settled beside him, her glow casting soft shadows on the canyon walls. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, the weight of their journey pressing down on them. "You were incredible back there," Aurora said finally, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "The way you handled yourself, the way you protected me. I've never seen such courage." Ethan chuckled, though the sound was tinged with weariness. "I'm not sure courage is the right word. More like stubbornness." Aurora smiled, her expression softening. "Whatever it is, I'm grateful for it." She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. The warmth of her touch was soothing, a balm against the stress and fatigue that threatened to overwhelm him. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his gaze meeting hers. "We've come this far," he said, his voice steady. "We'll get through this. Together." Aurora nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of determination and affection. Together, the connection between them was undeniable, a bond forged through shared trials and unspoken understanding. As they sat there, the weight of the moment gave way to a quiet intimacy. Aurora shifted closer, her head resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder. He didn't pull away, instead wrapping an arm around her, drawing her into his warmth. The sound of their synchronized breathing filled the alcove, a comforting rhythm that eased the tension in their bodies. Ethan closed his eyes, allowing himself a rare moment of peace. Aurora's presence was a constant reminder of the stakes they faced, but also of the strength they had found in each other. After a while, Aurora spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." Ethan opened his eyes, his attention fully on her. "What is it?" Aurora hesitated, her glow dimming slightly. "The bounty hunters. They're not just after me. They're after what we've created together. Our bond, our energy, it's powerful more than I realized. If they capture us, they'll use it to fuel their technology to control entire worlds. Ethan's jaw tightened, his grip on her shoulder firm. Then we won't let them. Whatever it takes, we'll stop them. Aurora looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. I believe in you, Ethan. In us. The intensity of her gaze sent a surge of emotion through him. He leaned in, their foreheads touching in a gesture of shared resolve. The warmth of their connection pulsed between them, a steady reminder of their strength. Ethan's voice was firm, unyielding. We'll find a way. We'll protect this. Their moment was interrupted by a distant sound. A low, mechanical hum that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He pulled back, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the canyon entrance. They've found us, he said, his voice low but urgent. Aurora stood, her glow intensifying as she prepared for what was to come. Then we faced them. Together. Ethan grabbed his rifle, his body tense but ready. The hum grew louder, the sound of approaching enemies echoing off the canyon walls. As the first bounty hunter emerged from the shadows, their glowing red eyes locked onto Ethan and Aurora. The tension reached its peak. This time they wouldn't run. This time they would fight. The hum of approaching enemies reverberated through the canyon, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan gripped his rifle, his eyes fixed on the narrow entrance where the bounty hunters would soon appear. Beside him, Aurora's glow intensified, her energy pulsating in waves as she prepared to defend them. They won't stop this time, Aurora said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. They'll push until one of us falls. Ethan nodded, his jaw set. Then we make sure it's them. The first bounty hunter emerged from the shadows, their metallic armor gleaming in the dim light. The crimson glow of their eyes scanned the canyon, locking onto Ethan and Aurora with unerring precision. Another figure followed, then a third, each one armed and moving with calculated precision. Ethan fired the first shot, the crack of the rifle echoing through the canyon. The bullet struck the lead hunter's shoulder, staggering them but failing to pierce their reinforced armor. The hunter raised their weapon, a pulse cannon that crackled with energy, and returned fire. Ethan dove behind a rock as the blast struck the ground where he had stood moments before, sending a shower of debris into the air. Aurora raised her hands, summoning a shimmering barrier of light that deflected another energy blast aimed at them. The impact rippled through her, but she held firm, her focus unwavering. I can hold them off for a while, she said, her voice strained. But it won't last forever. We don't need forever, Ethan replied, reloading his rifle. Just long enough. He leaned out from cover, firing another shot that struck the second hunter in the leg, causing them to stumble. The third hunter flanked them, moving swiftly along the canyon wall. Ethan cursed under his breath, realizing they were trying to box them in. Aurora's barrier flickered, the strain beginning to show. She gasped, her glow dimming for a moment before she steadied herself. They're adapting, she said. Their energy weapons are designed to disrupt my defenses. Ethan's mind raced, searching for a way to turn the tide. He spotted a loose boulder perched precariously on the canyon wall above the hunters. An idea formed, risky but potentially effective. Aurora, can you focus your energy on that boulder? He asked, pointing. She followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing in understanding. I'll need a clear shot. Consider it done. Ethan fired another volley, forcing the hunters to take cover and momentarily halting their advance. Now, Aurora extended her hands, her glow intensifying as she directed a concentrated beam of energy toward the boulder. The crystal pulse struck its mark, the rock groaning under the force. With a final crack, the boulder broke free, tumbling down the canyon wall. It crashed into the lead hunter, crushing them under its weight and sending a shockwave of dust and debris through the air. The remaining two hunters staggered, momentarily disoriented. Ethan seized the opportunity, charging forward with his rifle at the ready. He fired point-blank at the second hunter, the impact knocking them to the ground. The third hunter recovered quickly, raising their weapon, But Aurora was faster. She unleashed a burst of energy that struck the hunter's weapon, overloading it and forcing them to drop it. Ethan tackled the disarmed hunter, their armor clanging against the rocky ground. He wrestled the figure, grappling for control as they struggled beneath him. The hunter lashed out with a gauntlet fist, striking Ethan in the side and knocking the wind out of him. Gritting his teeth, Ethan fought through the pain, managing to pin the hunter's arm and deliver a solid blow to their helmet. The hunter's movements slowed, their strength waning. Ethan didn't relent, his determination fueled by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. With one final strike, the hunter went limp, their systems shutting down. Ethan rolled off the hunter, gasping for breath. His body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but he forced himself to his feet. "Aurora, are you?" "I'm fine," she called from behind him, her glow steady once more. She approached quickly, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "You took a hit." "Nothing I can't handle," Ethan said, though he winced as he pressed a hand to his side. "What about you? Did they?" "I'm okay," Aurora assured him, her hands gently brushing against his arm. Her touch sent a soothing warmth through him, easing some of the tension in his body. "Thanks to you." Ethan managed a small smile, the weight of the battle beginning to lift. But the moment was short-lived. A low, guttural sound echoed through the canyon. The distorted voice of one of the hunters, still conscious despite their injuries. "You cannot escape," the voice rasped, filled with menace. "More will come." Aurora's expression hardened, her glow flaring briefly. "Then we'll be ready." Ethan stepped forward, his gaze cold and unyielding. "Tell your friends if they come after us, they'll get the same treatment." The hunter didn't respond, their systems shutting down completely. Ethan turned back to Aurora, his resolve unwavering. "We need to keep moving. They'll send reinforcements, and I'd rather not be here when they show up." Aurora nodded, her hand finding his once more. "There's another convergence point further ahead," she said. "If we can reach it, we might be able to use its energy to create a more permanent solution." "Lead the way," Ethan said, his grip on her hand firm. Together, they left the alcove, the canyon stretching out before them as they prepared for the next leg of their journey. Though the battle had left its mark, their bond had only grown stronger. They moved as one, their shared purpose driving them forward. And as they disappeared into the shadows of the canyon, the hum of the convergence point echoed behind them, a reminder of the power they held and the challenges yet to come. The canyon stretched on, its winding paths growing narrower as Ethan and Aurora pressed forward. The air was cooler here, the towering walls casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the light. Despite the rugged terrain and the lingering tension from their last encounter, they moved with purpose, their bond a steady anchor in the chaos surrounding them. Aurora's glow remained soft but constant, a beacon that guided their way. She walked close to Ethan, their shoulders brushing with each step. Neither spoke much, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them like a heavy cloak. The second convergence point wasn't far, but the journey there felt like a delicate balancing act, each step a reminder of how much was at stake. "We're close," Aurora said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice carried a calm certainty, but there was an undercurrent of urgency that Ethan couldn't ignore. "How close?" Ethan asked, his eyes scanning the narrow path ahead. Aurora paused, closing her eyes for a moment as if listening to something only she could hear. "Just beyond the next ridge. The energy is faint but unmistakable." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Good. Let's pick up the pace." They climbed the rocky incline, the path growing steeper with every step. Ethan's muscles burned, his body still recovering from the earlier fight, but he pushed through the pain. Aurora's presence beside him was a constant reassurance, her quiet strength a reminder of why they couldn't afford to stop. As they crested the ridge, the canyon opened into a wide expanse. In the center stood the second convergence point, a massive crystalline structure that glimmered faintly in the dim light. Unlike the first, this one appeared fractured, its once vibrant glow reduced to a flickering pulse. Aurora's expression shifted, a mix of concern and determination. "It's unstable," she said, her voice tense. "The energy flow is disrupted. Can you fix it?" Ethan asked, his gaze flicking between her and the structure. Aurora nodded, though her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'll need to realign the energy channels. It won't be easy, especially in its current state." Ethan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the surrounding cliffs. "And we'll need to do it fast. If those hunters catch up to us here..." Aurora didn't need him to finish the thought. She stepped toward the convergence point, her hands outstretched as she began to channel her energy. The crystalline structure responded, its flickering light growing steadier, but the hum of instability still echoed through the air. Ethan stayed close, his rifle at the ready. His eyes never stopped moving, watching for any sign of movement along the ridges above. Every instinct told him the hunters wouldn't give up so easily. Sure enough, a faint mechanical whine reached his ears, growing louder with each passing second. "They're here," Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. "Keep working. I'll handle them." Aurora's focus didn't waver. "Be careful," she murmured, her glow intensifying as she poured more energy into the convergence point. Ethan moved to higher ground, taking cover behind a jagged outcrop. The first hunter appeared on the ridge, their armored silhouette framed against the canyon wall. Ethan didn't hesitate. He aimed and fired, the shot striking the hunter's chest plate and sending them staggering back. A second hunter emerged from the opposite ridge, their pulse cannon charging with a low hum. Ethan cursed under his breath, shifting his position to avoid the incoming blast. The energy bolts struck the ground near him, sending a shockwave of heat and debris through the air. Ethan returned fire, his shots forcing the hunter to retreat momentarily. But it was clear they were outnumbered, and the enemy was closing in. He glanced back at Aurora, her figure bathed in light as she worked tirelessly to stabilize the convergence point. "We're running out of time," Ethan called out, his voice barely audible over the sound of gunfire. Aurora didn't respond, her entire focus on the task at hand. The crystalline structure pulsed brighter now, its fractured surface beginning to mend. But the strain was evident in her posture, her glow flickering as she channeled more energy than her body could safely handle. Ethan's heart pounded as he turned his attention back to the hunters. One of them had taken up a position on a nearby ledge, their weapon trained on Aurora. Ethan's pulse quickened, a surge of protective instinct driving him forward. He fired a rapid series of shots, forcing the hunter to redirect their aim. With the hunter momentarily distracted, Ethan moved swiftly, closing the distance between them. He lunged, tackling the figure to the ground. They grappled for control, the hunter's strength formidable even with their armor damaged. Ethan's fingers found a weak point in the armor, and with a final push, he slammed the butt of his rifle into the exposed joint. The hunter fell still, their systems shutting down. Ethan didn't have time to catch his breath. The remaining hunter was already repositioning, their weapon charging for another shot. Ethan scrambled to his feet, raising his rifle, but before he could fire, a sudden surge of light erupted from the convergence point. Aurora cried out, her glow reaching an almost blinding intensity. The crystalline structure pulsed with raw energy, its fractures sealing completely. The hum of instability faded, replaced by a steady, harmonious vibration that resonated through the canyon. The final hunter hesitated, their weapon faltering as the overwhelming energy disrupted their systems. Ethan seized the opportunity, firing a well-placed shot that struck the hunter's weapon, rendering it useless. The figure retreated, disappearing into the shadows of the canyon. Ethan lowered his rifle, his breath coming in heavy gasps. He turned back to Aurora, who stood at the convergence point, her body radiating a calm, steady light. She looked exhausted but victorious, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "It's done," she said, her voice soft but steady. "The convergence point is stabilized." Ethan approached her, his expression a mix of concern and admiration. "You okay?" Aurora nodded, though she swayed slightly on her feet. Ethan reached out, steadying her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thanks to you, she said. Her smile faint but genuine. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his body finally beginning to ease. We're not out of the woods yet, but that should buy us some time. Aurora leaned into his touch, her glow dimming to a gentle shimmer. We'll face whatever comes next, she said quietly. Together, Ethan nodded, his resolve solidifying. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they could overcome them, as long as they had each other. The convergence point's soft, rhythmic hum filled the canyon, its steady pulse echoing the synchronized connection between Ethan and Aurora. The crystalline structure now stood whole and radiant, casting shimmering patterns across the rocky walls. But the tranquility it exuded was deceptive. Both Ethan and Aurora knew the battle wasn't over. Aurora swayed slightly, her glow flickering as she leaned on Ethan for support. Her energy, though replenished by the convergence point, had been taxed to its limits during the stabilization process. Ethan tightened his grip around her shoulders, guiding her toward a sheltered crevice beneath an overhang of jagged rock. You need to rest, Ethan said, his voice firm but laced with concern. Aurora shook her head weakly. There's no time, she murmured. The stabilization won't deter them for long. They'll regroup and come back stronger. Ethan frowned, his gaze flickering toward the ridges above. The hunters had retreated, but the silence left in their wake was unnerving. Then we'll be ready, he said, determination hardening his tone. But you can't fight if you burn yourself out. Aurora hesitated, her eyes searching his. There was a quiet intensity in Ethan's expression, a steadfast resolve that gave her a small measure of peace. She finally nodded, allowing herself to sink onto the cool stone. Ethan knelt beside her, keeping his rifle within arm's reach as he scanned the surrounding canyon for any sign of movement. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. For the first time since their escape began, they found a moment of stillness. Ethan let his guard down just enough to glance at Aurora, her form bathed in the soft glow of the convergence point's light. Even now, her presence filled the space with a quiet warmth that eased the tension in his chest. You've done more than anyone could ask, Ethan said, breaking the silence. You've held your own every step of the way. Aurora's lips curved into a faint smile. I couldn't have made it this far without you, she replied, her voice soft. You've given me strength, Ethan. More than you know. Ethan looked down, his hand resting lightly on hers. You've done the same for me, he admitted. Before you showed up, I thought I was done, just living out the days with no real purpose. Aurora's fingers tightened around his, her glow pulsing gently in response. And now, Ethan met her gaze, his expression softening. Now I know there's something worth fighting for. The space between them seemed to shrink, the weight of their shared journey drawing them closer. Aurora lifted her free hand, her fingertips grazing the side of Ethan's face in a gesture that was both tender and grounding. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly as the warmth of their bond filled the quiet. When he opened his eyes, Aurora was watching him intently, her expression open and unguarded. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan leaned in, their foreheads touching in a gesture of quiet intimacy. The hum of the convergence point grew softer, as if attuned to the moment between them. Aurora's voice was barely a whisper. We're stronger together. Ethan nodded, his breath mingling with hers. Always. The sound of distant movement shattered the fragile peace. Ethan's head snapped up, his grip tightening on his rifle as he scanned the ridges. The faint, mechanical whine of the hunter's equipment echoed through the canyon, growing steadily louder. They're coming, Aurora said, her voice steadier now despite the tension in the air. Ethan helped her to her feet, their moment of respite replaced by the urgency of the impending fight. Aurora's glow brightened as she summoned her energy, her eyes hardening with resolve. They'll try to overwhelm us, she said, but the convergence point's energy is on our side now. We can use it. Ethan nodded. Let's make sure they regret coming back. The first hunter appeared at the canyon's edge, their armored form illuminated by the crystalline light. This one was different, larger, more heavily armed, their movements methodical and precise. Two more followed, flanking their leader as they advanced. Ethan didn't wait. He fired the first shot, the rifle's crack splitting the air. The bullet struck the lead hunter's chest, sparking against their reinforced armor, but barely slowing them down. The hunters returned fire, energy bolts streaking toward them. Aurora raised her hands, summoning a shimmering barrier that absorbed the blasts. The convergence point's light flared in response, feeding her power. She pushed back, her energy surging outward in a wave that forced the hunters to scatter. Ethan moved quickly, using the disruption to his advantage. He fired a series of precise shots, targeting the hunters' exposed joints. One stumbled, their weapon sparking as they struggled to regain their footing. Aurora followed up with a focused beam of light, striking the weakened hunter and sending them crashing to the ground. The lead hunter advanced relentlessly, their pulse cannon charging with a high-pitched whine. Ethan aimed for the weapon, but the hunter anticipated the move, deflecting the shot with a sudden shift of their armor. The cannon fired, a blast of energy ripping through the air and striking the ground near Ethan and Aurora. The shockwave knocked them back, the force sending Ethan sprawling against the canyon wall. He groaned, his vision swimming as he struggled to push himself up. Aurora was already on her feet, her glow fierce as she stood between him and the advancing hunter. With a sharp cry, Aurora unleashed another wave of energy, the convergence point's light amplifying her power. The blast struck the lead hunter head-on, their armor cracking under the force. They staggered, their movements faltering as Aurora pressed the attack. Ethan forced himself to his feet, his rifle in hand. He fired at the remaining hunter, driving them back toward the canyon's edge. The hunter's foot slipped on loose rock, and with a final shot, Ethan sent them tumbling over the side. Only the lead hunter remained, their armor battered but their resolve unbroken. They raised their pulse cannon again, but this time, Ethan and Aurora were ready. Together, they focused their combined strength, their energies merging in a brilliant surge. The final blast from the convergence point struck the hunter, the light consuming them in a blinding flash. When it faded, the hunter was gone, their form disintegrated by the overwhelming force. Silence returned to the canyon, the hum of the convergence point the only sound. Ethan lowered his rifle, his breathing heavy as he turned to Aurora. She stood tall, her glow steady despite the intensity of the battle. Ethan crossed the distance between them, his hand finding hers. "It's over," he said, his voice low but sure. "For now," Aurora replied, her eyes meeting his. "But we've shown them our strength." Ethan nodded, the bond between them stronger than ever. Together they would face whatever came next. The aftermath of the battle left the canyon in a hushed stillness, the crystalline convergence point pulsing softly in the background. Ethan and Aurora stood side by side, their breathing heavy as they surveyed the scene. The hunters were gone, their threat neutralized for now, but the weight of their journey still lingered in the air. Ethan lowered his rifle, letting it hang loosely at his side. His muscles ached, his body battered from the relentless fight, but his focus remained sharp. Aurora, her glow steady and warm, turned to him with a quiet intensity in her eyes. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "The convergence point is safe. For now," Ethan replied, his gaze scanning the canyon walls. "They'll regroup. They always do." Aurora nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "But we're stronger now. Together we've proven that." Ethan met her gaze, the connection between them unspoken but palpable. The bond they had forged, through battles, through shared fears and moments of vulnerability, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just a partnership born of necessity. It was a unity of purpose, of trust, of something deeper that neither of them had fully put into words. "We need to move," Aurora said, breaking the silence. "The convergence point will continue to stabilize, but we can't stay here. There are other places we need to protect." Ethan nodded, shouldering his pack. "Lead the way." They set off, the canyon's path winding through towering rock formations and narrow passes. The terrain was unforgiving, but neither of them faltered. The quiet rhythm of their footsteps and the distant hum of the convergence point filled the space between them, a reminder of the journey still ahead. After hours of travel, they reached a small plateau overlooking a sprawling valley. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, dotted with crystalline structures that pulsed faintly in the distance. It was a rare moment of peace, and Ethan couldn't help but pause, taking in the sight. Aurora stood beside him, her expression soft as she followed his gaze. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, his voice low. "Hard to believe there's a war out there with something like this in front of us." Aurora turned to him, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "Moments like this remind us why we fight," she said. "Why we endure." Ethan looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. Every battle, every sacrifice was for something greater, something worth protecting. He reached out, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that spoke volumes. They stood there for a while, letting the serenity of the moment wash over them. For once, the world seemed to hold its breath, giving them a brief reprieve from the chaos that had defined their journey. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the valley in hues of deep orange and purple, Aurora spoke again. "There's something I need to show you," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of mystery. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Aurora smiled, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "You'll see. Come on." She led him down a narrow path that wound through the rocks, the light of her glow guiding their way as the sky darkened. They descended into a hidden grove, the air cool and filled with the soft rustle of leaves. In the center of the grove stood a smaller crystalline structure, its light pulsing gently, almost like a heartbeat. Aurora approached the crystal, her hand outstretched. "This is a guardian shard," she explained, "a fragment of the convergence point's energy. It holds the same power but on a smaller scale. It can protect and heal." Ethan watched as the shard responded to her touch, its light growing brighter. "Why show me this now?" he asked. "Because," Aurora said, turning to face him, "this is how we'll continue to fight. With each guardian shard we protect, we strengthen our connection to the convergence points. And with your help, we can protect even more of them." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the shard. "And if we lose one?" Aurora's expression grew serious. "Then we'll find another. As long as we stand together, we'll keep fighting. We'll keep protecting." Ethan nodded, his resolve solidifying. "Then let's make sure we don't lose any." Aurora smiled, her glow softening. She stepped closer to him, their proximity bringing an unspoken warmth. "You've given me hope, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I ever thought possible." Ethan reached up, his hand resting gently on her cheek. "You've done the same for me." The space between them seemed to disappear, the weight of their shared journey drawing them closer. Their foreheads touched, their breaths mingling as the warmth of their connection pulsed between them. It was a moment of quiet intimacy, a shared promise of the battles they would face and the strength they would find in each other. As the night deepened, the grove filled with the gentle hum of the guardian shard. Ethan and Aurora stood together, their bond unbreakable, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They were no longer just two individuals fighting to survive. They were a force united by purpose, by trust, and by something deeper that neither of them could deny. And as they set out once more, the light of the shard illuminating their path, they knew that together, they could overcome anything.